Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. In 1909, the Socialist Party of America organized a Women's Day in New York City. The next year, at the International Socialist Women's Conference, it was decided that March 8th be honored as a day in memory of working women. This day has been celebrated as International Women's Day or International Working Women's Day ever since. It was adopted by the feminist movement in this country in the late 1960s and became an official celebration of the United Nations in 1975. In a year when we here are focused on the theme, what we hold most dear, exploring and integrating our individual and collective spirituality, perhaps it is especially important that again this year we join in this observance. And at a time when the ugly specter of egregious sexism is so often before us in appalling ways, we certainly need a day to remember and to renew our commitment to resist. Today we weave joy and challenge, beauty, spirituality, and the need for societal transformation all together. Welcome members, welcome guests. Your presence here matters. It makes a difference. Now, as we prepare to sing, we will greet one another. In light of the concern that now encircles our globe, some here may opt simply for a verbal greeting, foregoing handshakes and hugs. For that reason, make your words of welcome especially hearty and joy-filled.
words of Lizzo, if I'm shining, everybody gonna shine. The first reading is by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper from We Are All Bound Together, her speech at the 11th National Women's Rights Convention on May 1st, 1866 in New York City. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. I do not believe that giving the women the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. I think that, like men, they may be divided into three classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good would vote according to their convictions and principles. The bad, as dictated by prejudice or malice, and the indifferent will vote on the strongest side of the question with the winning party. You white women speak here of rights, I speak of wrongs.
A century and a half after our Unitarian forebear Frances Ellen Watkins Harper offered the speech, the excerpt you heard Catherine read, Angela Davis said this in a speech from not yet 3 years ago. Glass ceiling feminism is represented, is grounded from the very outset in hierarchies. I mean, how else does that metaphor work? Those who are already high enough to reach the ceiling are probably white. And then if they are not white, they are already affluent because they are at the top. As long as I have identified as a feminist, Davis continues, it has been clear to me that any feminism that privileges those who already have privilege is bound to be irrelevant to poor women, to working class women, to women of color, to trans women of color. If standards for feminism are created by those who have already ascended economic hierarchies and are attempting to make a last climb to the top, how is this relevant to women who are at the very bottom. Revolutionary hope resides precisely among those women who have been abandoned by history and who are now standing up and making their demands heard. Never, as the adage goes, never begin by apologizing. Today, however, I'll belie that maxim. I begin, if not with an apology, then at least with an admission. This just may not be my sermon to give. After all, on the pyramid of privilege, I am at the very top. Life dealt me an absurdly advantaged hand. Some of you will recall the late Molly Ivins' takedown of George H.W. Bush, born on third base and thought he hit a triple. Born as I was into a highly educated, comfortable family, born even more significantly with the two most powerful trump cards of privilege up my sleeve, being white and being male. My life has always had the benefit of those immense privileges. The learning some of us have been doing here is teaching me that I can't help but see life through that lens. No matter how hard I work to become anti-racist, I'll always experience the world through the lens of my whiteness. And more to the point of today's service, no matter how hard I work to betray and subvert sexism, patriarchy, and misogyny, I'll never stop seeing and experiencing the world as a man. Who am I then to lead an observance of International Women's Day? What makes me think that I can be some modern-day Demosthenes, able to be heard over the oceanic roar of injustice with my mouth full of the pebbles of privilege? It is a risky proposition. If some opine that it would be better for me not to take this risk, I understand, or at least I think I do. I question, however, if we want to apply that disqualification across all arenas of privilege, if we insist that whites keep quiet while white supremacy continues to define and dominate our culture, if we insist that citizens keep quiet while immigrants' lives are threatened not just with indignity but with death, if we insist that heterosexuals and cisgender people keep quiet while homophobia and transphobia rage, if we insist that those with economic power keep quiet while the gaping gulf between the haves and the have-not nearly enoughs widens from a chasm to a canyon, then won't this always leave the oppressed to fend for themselves in a world in which they already face an unjust fate? I take some solace from Justine Musk, who declares, the enemy of feminism isn't men. It's patriarchy. And patriarchy is not men. It's a system. And women can support the system of patriarchy just as men can support the fight for gender equality. So consider this an effort to participate in that fight. A struggle that has gone on for 4 centuries, from the arrival of those first colonizers until, need I remind anyone here, until this past week. To proffer a prosaic, if also accurate aphorism, today there is good news and not so good news. First, the good news. By any measure, we as a nation have made dramatic progress where the journey toward gender equality is concerned. Of course, that bar was set astoundingly low at our founding. In March 1776, weeks before the colonies would declare their independence, Abigail Adams would write to her husband, John, then serving in the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than were your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. John Adams, the future second president of the United States, wrote her a mocking response that included the lines, "Depend on it. We know better than to repeal our masculine systems." And of course it was John, not Abigail, who got his way. Documentary filmmaker Kamala Lopez explains, when our Constitution was written in 1787, women had no rights whatsoever. We were chattel owned first by our fathers and then by our husbands. Ruth Bader Ginsburg concurs, as framed in 1787, the Constitution was a document of governance for and by white, propertied, adult males. Now, doesn't that make you wonder even more about those who continue to call themselves strict constitutionalists? Who are determined to hew, they say, to the narrow intent expressed by those original framers. It's important to note that this, as John Adams called it, this masculine system was a system, a social construct. The fact that it may be possible to find in the writings of some man of the time some statement suggesting that he might think of women as his equal doesn't change that reality. The fact that some men may actually have treated women as their equals doesn't change that reality. As we are learning more deeply here, it takes more than altered personal attitudes and behavior to transform structural injustice. Simply changing hearts and minds is never enough. What ultimately must change is the system, is the structure, that social construct that is perpetuating oppression. Far short of anything remotely like full structural transformation, with way too many obvious examples of egregious sexism. And now, at the end of a week, when many of us felt deep disappointment, when some of us felt intense outrage, when a few of us may have felt utter despair, we can, nonetheless, on this International Women's Day, note that there has been change, meaningful, substantive change. Even our deepest disappointments must not delude us into some indefensible assertion that nothing has ever really changed. We can rightly celebrate that the significant presence of women in both the United States Senate and House completely belies the original intent of those founders and framers. And though we still need many more women in those roles, and we certainly need far fewer women in those roles who, as Justine Musk rightly noted, support the system of patriarchy, we must count this as progress. We can rightly celebrate that the significant presence of women in medicine, law, science, academics, business, social work, community organizing, activism, teaching, nonprofit leadership, and the clergy marks unmistakable progress since our founding. Doors that did not even exist in a nation claiming as self-evident that all were created equal have now been opened, and we are all the better for it. We can rightly celebrate the hard-won, though very tenuously maintained autonomy of women over their bodies, their right to choose. The all too slow but unmistakable social progress for lesbians and trans women, the rise of the Me Too movement, and the convictions of certain high-profile serial rapists, the standing of certain women athletes and entertainers who are bucking the system and blazing new trails. We can celebrate these structural societal changes. Changes, we must always note, changes that are the products of the aggregated efforts of some women and some men, changes that politicians and the political system did not lead, but rather followed behind. There is good news, not just for women and girls, but for all of us who believe that worth and dignity have no gendered meaning whatsoever. we can and we should celebrate. But especially in a setting like this, a place that is steeped in all kinds of privilege that many in our city and our world could not imagine. It is essential on this day that we not overlook an important reality. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, the brilliant lawyer, civil rights advocate, philosopher, scholar, and author. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, she who developed the theory of intersectionality that increasingly informs our work here. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw declares with unmistakable conviction, I believe that women in power is absolutely essential. And that women in power is absolutely not enough. That's what our Unitarian forebear, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a free woman of color, was trying to tell those white women at the 11th National Women's Rights Convention, in words you heard earlier. Simply giving women the power of the vote is not, she said, going to cure all the ills of life. Voting white women may not prove to be the friends or the allies of other women. So while the white women spoke of their rights, Harper railed against wrongs. I believe that women in power is absolutely essential and that women in power is absolutely not enough. That's what you heard earlier in words from Angela Davis. She decries what she calls glass ceiling feminism. A feminism focused on getting more power for the already powerful. Any feminism, she says, that privileges those who already have privilege is bound to be irrelevant to poor women, to working class women, to women of color, to trans women, to trans women of color. Standards of feminism cannot be created only by those who have already ascended economic hierarchies. Davis does find hope. She finds revolutionary hope residing among those women who have been abandoned by history and who are now standing up and making their voices heard. Once again, we are summoned to listen to and learn from those on the margins, to embody a commitment to gender justice that is so transformative that we will rail against the police killing of Sandra Bland with the same vigor as we rail against the sidelining of Elizabeth Warren. To believe so deeply in the need for transformation that we will be as concerned for women who don't earn a living wage, who don't have access to any health care, who cannot imagine getting a paid day off, as we are that women in systems of power earn as much as men in those same systems. To understand ever more deeply what Eve Ensler means when she says, I don't really care if more women are in power. I care if more women who are fighting for people over profit are in power. She says, I want women to be in it to end poverty, to rethink racism, to stop global warming, to make parenting and sexuality and education and healthcare priorities, rather than being in it to win. And that is precisely what Kimberly Williams Crenshaw meant when she wrote and talked about intersectionality. The fight for gender equality in this land now enters its 5th century. All thanks and praise to those brave sheroes of our past. who saw beyond what was and is to what can be. All thanks and praise to those shamelessly feminist warriors who challenge social structures and social constructs, and who understood in the very marrow of their bones that altered minds and hearts would never be enough, who knew that the whole nation needed to change. All thanks and praise to those courageous women who never wanted us to settle for a few having power, for a few getting what is fair and just, for a few rising to the very top, but who were forever mindful of all who were being left out and left behind. Yes, there has been progress. We have come a long way. And if we really believe the high ideals of our liberating faith, if we truly believe that our vision and our mission matter, if we really are committed to transformation, we cannot rest, we cannot relent, we cannot refrain from ever more vigorous resisting. Onward. In the name of all that is good and true and beautiful, onward.
Welcome. My name is Whitfield. Last year I participated in the UUCC's Cultural Justice Core Group, where I had many aha moments that helped recalibrate how I viewed feminism. Throughout history, white women were viewed as delicate and needed to be protected, prompting white women wanting to break free from those boxes to be viewed as strong and independent. On the flip side, Black women weren't being viewed as delicate or needed to be protected. When I learned about feminism in the 1960s and 1970s, I learned about women fighting to work outside of the home. This narrative I learned left out it was predominantly white women fighting to work outside of the home and completely ignored the population of women that had no other choice than to work outside of the home in order to provide for their families. Once again, a narrative being told solely through the lens of cis white women, mostly upper class. Unfortunately, as I am learning, in our society, most of the benchmarks used in feminism to compare the progress women have been making or want to work towards center cis white women. We often celebrate women being able to vote as happening in 1920, end of story. However, this ignores the history of women who weren't white. In many states, Native Americans, which of course includes women, couldn't vote until as late as the 1960s. This also ignores the history of the legal barriers that were set up to prevent Black people from voting. We have all heard the statistic that women make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes, but that's not completely accurate. While white women make 77 cents, Black women make 61 cents, Native women make 58 cents, and Latina women make 53 cents. One quote from Audre Lorde that stands out to me is, "Some problems we share as women, some we do not. You fear your children will grow up to join the patriarchy and testify against you. We fear our children will be dragged from a car and shot down in the street, and you will turn your backs on the reasons they are dying." It reminded me of watching mothers cry in fear for their sons after Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and many others. Just like millions of women march for reproductive rights and body autonomy, Audre Lorde pointed to a very real issue women face as well, but an issue that doesn't garner the attention or the support because it isn't centered around white feminism. While most white women don't think twice about maternal mortality rates, the gap is widening by race. Mothers being separated from their children at borders is a woman's issue. Even a system that uses punitive measures instead of restorative measures or providing resources impacts women on so many levels and therefore is a women's issue. When the Me Too movement started making traction, it was initially credited to a white actress, ignoring Tarana Burke, a black woman, who started using that term almost a decade earlier. After the Women's March, many black and trans women came out saying they felt excluded not only by the issues, but also by the pink pussy hats used as a symbol of womanhood. Dropping the pink pussy hats should have been seen as an easy way to show solidarity among women. However, many women chose to continue to center a cutesy symbol over the feelings of other women. Based on the history of feminism, it doesn't surprise me that many are now embracing and finding the wisdom in womanism, a phrase coined by Alice Walker to highlight the needs of race and class-based oppression. According to Alice Walker, womanism is a woman who loves other women, sexually and/or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's flexibility, and women's strength, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female, not a separatist except periodically for health, loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves struggle, loves the folks, loves herself, regardless. Womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. I love how we women don't have the burden of male toxicity, and society doesn't frown on intimacy women share. We can be affectionate, vulnerable, and raw with each other. We can rally around each other during our highs and lows, all while empowering each other and building each other up, wanting the best life for each other. In the wise words of Audre Lorde, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. Thank you.
Welcome again. We're happy that you are here today, either in this room or joining us remotely. We're pleased that we have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you personally following the service. So if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Welcome to each of you. Members, take note of our guests seated near you and make sure they get a personal greeting following the service. So to enhance your experience of future services, we offer large print orders of service, personal hearing assistance devices, and we have an elevator available as well. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place it in the offering basket later in the service. Members, if you have a life event that you would like shared, please do so on the reverse side of those same cards. The cards and the offering envelopes are on the clipboards at the end of your rows. Please begin passing them down your row now. Visitors who are interested in hearing about how to become a member can talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. Immediately following this service, our congregation will gather to consider the possibility of altering our name. We will forego the greeting line at the door and encourage you simply to remain here in the sanctuary so that we can proceed toward our meeting expeditiously. All are invited to this meeting. Members meeting the terms of our bylaws are invited to vote. There are two special opportunities that are coming up later in the month. Next week, next Sunday, Elias Ortega, who is the new president of our Unitarian Universalist Seminary in Chicago, will be here to speak at 1 p.m. here in the sanctuary. For those who are interested in hearing the perspective of one of our liberating faith's key thought leaders, please join us next Sunday. And then on Sunday evening, March 29th, we will host singer-songwriter Holly Neer here in concert. Tickets are currently on sale. Many of our lives are weighted with personal concerns. It's for that reason we extend gentle kindness to one another, aware that these are especially difficult days for some here. Our world is weighted with concern for health, for safety, and that mystical bond that binds each to all. We offer our prayers for healing, for health, and for wholeness. Members of our congregation are upheld by our concern for them. On this day, we hold with love and in our prayers Donald Freund and Lee Mobius and Judy Reynolds and others whose needs we know personally. Please join me in meditation and aspiration. To the very spirit of life and love itself, we pause in gratitude on this day for all who, in ways great and small, have seen beyond what was to what could be, and who, with loving relentlessness and unrelenting love, acted and advocated for a more hope-filled future. May we, inspired by their witness and challenged by our liberating faith, see beyond what has been, see beyond what now is, and see anew the world as it could and as it should be. For all. Amen.
Maya Angelou once said, "When you learn, teach. When you get, give." We will now give and receive the offering.
Please join me in an affirmation of our faith rising in body and our spirit. As we resist, we must never forget why we are resisting. We cannot forget that we want to change the world. I remind you of the meeting to follow. If you would like to participate, you're encouraged to just remain in this space. Should you opt to step out, please honor the fact that we don't have coffee in this room. And we will begin the meeting as soon as possible, 12:30. If we want change, it is we who must change. If we want substantive, transformative change, we must align ourselves with disruptors, with disturbers, with revolutionaries who will settle for nothing less than a changed world. Please be seated.